Tom Mulcair, thanks for this.
Great to be with you, Matt.
So, pretty intense evening last night over at the Radio Canada building. What were your thoughts on let's first talk about the debate itself. Were there any big takeaways? Any punches landed?
One of the better debates I've seen, Matt.
Okay.
Honestly, it was one of the better ones that I've seen. The two main opponents, who were, of course, Prime Minister Mark Carney and Opposition Leader Pierre Poilievre, they were both really good. There was an obvious pile-on against Carney because, of course, everybody else in the room wanted to beat him up. When you've got the most, you've got the most to lose. So they were all coming after him. I think that Poilievre overall acquitted himself pretty well. On form, he had a little bit of trouble, I would say, because he kept talking over the other people who were involved in the debates, and I never think that that's a good idea. But on substance, he just kept repeating his lines, the same lines that we know, his law and order lines. Sometimes it gets a bit murky because he wants to take away people's charter rights in order to better defend their charter rights. It's a little bit hard to explain.
Right.
But overall, I think that he did a good job. He stuck to his idea of constantly repeating that Canada doesn't need a fourth Liberal term. Well, of course, the Conservatives don't need a fourth Liberal term because they don't want to be in opposition. But the real question is, what are you proposing as an alternative? And that's a little bit less clear. He's a strong debater, and he showed that again last night. Carney just had to survive. He had to get through this thing. We knew it was going to be a pile-up. His own body language, it was a bit odd that he was never looking over at Poilievre, but that was clearly something that they had worked out in advance. They weren't going to look. They were going to look more at the camera. He was solid. You could tell that he didn't have the same experience on the debate stage that Poilievre has. With regard to Blanchette, I'm still not convinced that he has any place whatsoever in the English language debate. He doesn't have 90%, coverage of the ridings across Canada. He barely has 4% in the polls. I think it was just a mistake that he should have been allowed in there.
Can I ask you on your take of why he was allowed? I understand why, obviously, he's allowed in the French language debate, but why compared to the Green Party, who have hundreds more candidates?
Yeah, don't ask me to justify that any decision by this so-called Leaders Debate Commission. We should spend maybe a couple of minutes on that, because that's the other part of yesterday evening that actually dominated. If you look at the newspaper in particular, the newspaper coverage today, you have to go through all of the stories about a gang of wackos from alternative media that this bird-brained commission had allowed into the room Wednesday night for the French language debate. They took over the microphones. They asked bizarre questions that had nothing to do with journalism. Mr. Carney, how many genders are there? Just nonsense. Even last night, one of them kept screaming as they were announcing there would be no scrums. One of them kept screaming at the top of his lungs, I hear it's because Mark Carney doesn't want a scrum, which was pure malarkey. But you get it out loud, and you're hoping that somebody will pick it up and repeat it. So they should never have been in the room. This is not real media. And by the way, they even found out that they had to register under the electoral laws as people who were doing something other than journalism, and didn't matter. This commission was a joke. They allowed the Greens to come in with nowhere near the required number of candidates. They allowed the Greens to come in, and then they booted them out on the last day, the day of the French debate, and they were kept out of both debates. Now, this was supposed to take away the problems for the debates. What we saw is you create a bureaucracy, you give it too much money, and then it just falls into a shambles.
Just to sort of push back a little bit on that, there was this court case, right? Like 4 years ago, the debate commission did try to actually bar Rebel News from accreditation, and they lost in court and were forced to give them the accreditation. And so they didn't want to go down that road again this time. Do you think they should have anyway?
Of course they should have. They didn't have to accept 5 of them from there. You allow 1 in from the real news sources, but you're going to allow 5 in from one of these fake news sources. They won a court case. They're allowed to show up. Fine. But then you know what's going to happen. This is because their court case was against this thing because it exists as a bureaucracy. Go back to 2015. Stephen Harper, Justin Trudeau, and myself. What did we do? We had a Maclean's Magazine debate, a Globe and Mail debate, a Monk School debate. We had the one that resembled this debate that was done at Radio Canada. It was one of the people there was the same Patrice Roy who was there this year for the French debate. So, the political parties are just going to do this on their own. They had something similar in the United States, this type of thing, this sort of, institution that had been created for leaders' debates. And now the political parties are just ignoring it and organizing on their own.
Tom, today you for CTV News, you wrote a column about the impact of that sort of media mayhem backstage, and you think it's perhaps going to overshadow some of the punches that Poilievre was able to land.
Yeah, it's almost too bad for Poilievre because, of course, these people are on his side. They take very much his point of view. They're a little bit kookier. They're even a little bit further right wing, but Poilievre definitely knows that they're part of his base and they're helping him. But they didn't help him yesterday because the stunts that they pulled, I don't know if you saw it, once the debates were over, there was a technician from one of the mainstream media who was rolling, on a dolly, rolling his all his camera equipment out, and they started harassing him. It was completely crazy.
Yeah, they had the phone in his face with the light on.
It was crazy. It was just completely, it was gonzo guerrilla theater behavior to get attention for themselves. I'm sorry, the minute that becomes the top line in the story in all the newspapers across the country, nobody's talking about Pierre Poilievre's otherwise quite good performance in that debate. So instead of helping him, they hurt him.
Tom, just heading into the last 10 days of this this election campaign, voting intention, most recent polling, 44-37 for the Liberals. It's a 7-point lead. And the preferred prime minister, again, the gap is widening, 48% for Carney, 33.6% for Poilievre. What are you expecting from the last week or so of this campaign?
I think that the jello is pretty well starting to set, Matt. I don't think that there's going to be much change. The Liberals were hoping to pick up maybe several more seats, let's say, in a place like Alberta. They might go up to 3 in Alberta. I don't think they'll go beyond that. I think that the hemorrhage from the other parties is pretty well stopped. The NDP is still in single digits. They might be able to hold on to 12 seats, which is what they need to maintain party status. It's going to be a battle for them. It's going to be very hard. The Bloc Québécois is in free fall. It's just unbelievable what's happening across Quebec. Now, did anything happen in the debates? Is there anything that's going to happen this weekend? People are talking around their Easter dinners this weekend. Long weekends are notorious in politics for setting people's minds, but also changing people's minds. So a lot can happen over this Easter weekend. But I live in the countryside where the Bloc dominates, and I can tell you right now, the Bloc doesn't dominate in this election. It's going to be the Liberals across the board.
When this campaign started, you and I spoke, and I asked you sort of what the 3, 4, or I guess 5 weeks is like from your perspective, having been through it. What is this last 10 days like, this sprint to the finish like for the candidates?
They have to remain professional. They have to remain focused on the prize. It was interesting to watch Singh go at it last night. He was talking over other people, didn't necessarily leave the best impression, but he figured that he had to start showing strength. In the French debate, Singh even started started going after the moderator, the Patrice Roy that I just mentioned. Blanchette is the most frustrated right now because he has a rather high opinion of his opinions and of himself, and he can't believe that he's actually in so much trouble. I do think that the Bloc is going to continue to slide. They have 35 seats right now. I don't see them winning more than 8 or 9.
All right, Tom Mulcair, thank you so much for this.